When you think of outer space, what story keeps you up at night? It's a question I've been trying to answer, and I think I finally know. I keep coming back to what happened on Mars to the rover Opportunity, because she was kind of a hero. A little robot built to study rocks and soil on a distant planet to send photos back to Earth. When she landed in 2004, she was supposed to operate for just 90 days, but kept going for 15 years. A decade and a half of sending data bursts until her lonely trek across Mars came to an end when a planetary dust storm blinded her solar panels. Before it was too late, Opportunity sent one final message home saying, "My battery's low, and it's getting dark." There's something about this story, the thought of a lonely robot dying millions of miles from home, that fills me with a dread I can't quite explain. For centuries, outer space has terrified us on a primal level. It's no surprise. It's a realm that confronts us with our own insignificance, a place we could disappear into without leaving a trace. Opportunity might have been just a robot, and the real message she sent back home was less poetic, but her story about being on another planet, far removed from anything alive, something about it triggered a familiar dread. The term for this fear is astrophobia, an intense dread of stars, distant planets, and the night sky. And the name might be clinical. The feeling is ancient. It's the same shiver we felt for millennia when looking up at the stars. An instinctive terror born from the knowledge that beyond our atmosphere lies an expanse of infinite scale and impossible dangers. What comes to mind when we think of the horror of outer space? It's tempting to begin right in the heart of the cosmos with distant galaxies and black holes. But for most of us, the fear doesn't start out there. It starts right here on Earth. That's why it's curious then that for most of human history, the stars were silent. A haunting beauty we could only admire from afar. But from the moment we developed the technology to listen, we discovered something more than just silence. Opportunity sending data burst across space is proof of how far human ingenuity has come with a new ability to speak into the void. But they also leave a different question, because if we can send signals outward, who's to say something couldn't send one back? In 1977, a radio telescope at Ohio State University picked up a strange 72-second signal from deep space. It was so distinct from background noise that the astronomer on duty circled the printout and scrawled a single word in the margins: "Wow," leading to the event's widely used name as the "Wow signal." Among the many strange signals we've pulled from the cosmic static, this narrow-band radio signal remains one of the most mysterious. And what made it extraordinary wasn't just its intensity, but how perfectly it matched what scientists had hoped an alien transmission might look like. It was, in every sense, the kind of message we were listening for. But the idea of receiving a message from the void can be so unsettling. It's no wonder most media shows it less like contact and more like a warning. In the game Signal Simulator, I was alone in a remote observatory scanning for extraterrestrial signs. My first instinct was to simply follow the instructions and extract interstellar information, sure. But existing alone in a barren stretch of land, surrounded by metal towers and endless silence, that simplicity quickly began to fade. The game had me perform tasks like cleaning solar panels and realigning satellites to slowly condition me into a working rhythm. But the long stretches of nothingness with only the empty sky I was scanning above me made my brain fill in the blanks. Slowly, the ritual of performing tasks became disturbed by strange glitches, weather changes, and eerie signal sounds. I couldn't see any real danger when I looked outside, but something felt wrong. Eventually, I received a message, and when I decoded it, it read, "That's what they are now. Just ants. Edible ants." Okay, that's creepy. And outside the window, I'd like to say that this was where I hit my limit, but then I discovered this other game. In more ways than one, Voices of the Void can be considered the spiritual successor to Signal Simulator. Deep within a thick Swiss forest in the mountains, you're locating, decoding, and interpreting radio signals from space. If Signal Simulator is about the anxiety of waiting for something to speak back, Voices of the Void is about what happens when something finally does, and then keeps speaking in ways that are difficult to comprehend. It took me 30 minutes to understand how to download a signal from one of the computers, and that was like the first thing I was supposed to do. You're given these tools like a massive terminal full of readouts, a radar that pings nearby entities, and a panoramic window to monitor the forest outside. But none of them make the job any easier. The radar doesn't tell you what's out there, only that something is. The window doesn't give you a full view, it just hints at what you can't see. Playing felt like looking at a map with half of the paths missing. This game preys on the primal fear of being alone, vulnerable, and the fear of the unknown, the classic hallmarks of horror surrounding outer space. Because AAA games that want to be scary often follow a formula. Set up the scare, subvert expectation, deliver the monster. But in this game, and in many horror stories set in space, there's no such obligation. Every time I tried to understand its systems, to peel back its layers, I was met with noise, contradiction, and different types of events. Without giving too much away, there was one moment that lingered with me long after it ended. One evening I heard a loud noise in the distance, and when I decided to climb the radio tower for a better view, I spotted a colossal pyramid-shaped entity moving towards my base. And yet, it didn't really care about me. I just stood there as it passed me by, like a force from another world too cosmic to even register me. In 1974, astronomers broadcast something called the Arecibo message, a signal meant to show aliens what humans are like with our DNA, our solar system, our radio technology. It was mostly symbolic, a gesture of curiosity flung into the void. But in 2001, just outside a British radio telescope, a strange crop formation appeared, perfectly mirroring the format of the original message, but altered. Where we had placed humans, this one showed a different being. Where we had shown Earth, it circled another planet. Was it a hoax? Yeah, probably. But what made it eerie was how easy it was to believe, how ready we are to assume something out there might respond. It reminds me of the three-body problem by Cixin Liu, where the inherent risk of sending a message into the unknown is realized after a single person's reaching hand across unimaginable distances receives a reply. There are tens of millions of stars in your direction. As long as you do not answer, this world will not be able to ascertain the source of your transmission. Responding would reveal Earth's location immediately. But if somebody were to believe that humanity is already lost to its own flaws, then perhaps being found is the only way the story can change. We've always been drawn to the edges of maps. In every age, every culture, every generation, there's been that same gravitational pull to go beyond what we know, to reach for the dark corners where the light hasn't touched. First, it was the next valley, then the sea, then the sky, so the next stop had to be the stars. But what happens when we actually go there? Long duration space missions have given us more than scientific data. They've shown us what the void does to the mind. Fiction calls it space madness, for the slow psychological decay brought on not by monsters, but by the emptiness of space. The silence, the weightlessness, the sense of being nowhere, to the point that astronauts have reported hallucinations, emotional breakdowns, and even religious awakenings. That's a true story, by the way. On Apollo 15, astronaut Jim Irwin, who was a non-practicing Protestant, was touched by grace, and upon his return to Earth, he founded an evangelical movement to embark on a search for Noah's Ark. Jim was not alone in his experience. In fact, something strange seems to happen when you leave Earth behind. Some astronauts describe a phenomenon called the overview effect as a sudden, overwhelming realization of Earth's fragility when viewed from orbit. A sense of awe, but also deep vulnerability. From that distance, what felt like a home is nothing more than a trembling dot suspended in nothing. William Shatner, the actor that played Captain Kirk in the original Star Trek television series, saw Earth from space and had a different reaction than most. In his book, Boldly Go: Reflections on a Life of Awe and Wonder, he wrote that he expressed a sense of grief and sadness at seeing the fragility of Earth. My trip to space was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral. In 1995, cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev spent over 300 days aboard the Mir space station. He later described the experience as a kind of sensory deprivation, where the line between memory and reality blurred. He said he began to dream differently in space, remembering friends and family as nothing more than just shapes and voices. And few films capture this quiet psychological erosion quite like 2019's Ad Astra. The story follows an astronaut sent on a mission across the solar system to find his missing father, an explorer who vanished while searching for intelligent life. But this movie isn't about aliens. It's not even really about the mission. It's about distance between planets, yeah, but mostly between people. As the astronaut travels deeper into space, the silence grows louder. The isolation becomes more complete, and what begins as a search for someone else gradually becomes a confrontation with himself. He's a man trained to suppress emotion, to function under pressure, and to remain detached, but space has a way of breaking those walls down. While doing research for this video, I came across a clear divide in the kinds of horror that space has to offer. On one side, there are the expected threats like hostile aliens and malevolent planets, but on the other, it's the slow unraveling of the mind that happens in space that reveals itself as the quieter, more insidious fear. One of the earliest and most striking examples comes from The Invincible, a 1963 novel by Stanislaw Lem. In it, a spacefaring crew discovers the remains of another expedition. The dead crew doesn't look torn apart by violence, but is seemingly undone by psychological collapse. With no visible wounds or clear cause, they look like minds that broke in the silence of a seemingly abandoned planet. In 2023, the game The Invincible was released as a kind of interactive prelude to the novel, a slow-burning descent into the same unnerving questions that haunted Lem's original story. You play as a scientist awakening on a desolate planet with little memory of how you got there. With no other choices, you decide to locate your missing crew. But as you explore the barren world, the silence starts to stretch and the questions begin to multiply. The planet isn't hostile in any obvious way. There are no alien beasts, no jump scares, no clear enemy. Yet somehow, the seemingly lifeless planet feels wrong. The terrain seems too still, the ruins too intentional. But The Invincible isn't content with a single layer of outer space storytelling. As the narrative unfolds, you begin to notice the planet isn't empty, but that it's home to a swarm of self-replicating micro-machines, a kind of post-biological ecosystem. But they aren't evil in the traditional sense. Just like that moment in Voices of the Void, where the pyramid-shaped entity moves across the map, colossal, unknowable, and completely disinterested. To these beings, you're not prey, you're not a threat, you're not anything. At the heart of so many horror stories set in space lies the truth that things don't have to mean you harm to be dangerous. They simply have to exist by rules that don't include you. It's easy to be afraid of what might happen when you land on a distant planet, even the ones orbiting our own sun, because we like to think of our solar system as familiar. But the truth is, it's filled with worlds that would kill us in seconds. If you were to land on, let's say, Venus, you wouldn't survive for more than a minute. The heat alone, over 450 degrees Celsius, would immediately melt your equipment. The pressure is 92 times greater than Earth's. It would crush your body before you took a single step. Not to mention the atmosphere that's basically a toxic soup of carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid thick enough to block most sunlight. It's beautiful from orbit and instantly lethal below it. On Jupiter, there's nowhere to land at all. If you descended into its upper clouds, you'd pass through storms larger than Earth itself, then into a sea of supercritical fluids, neither liquid nor gas, buffeted by winds faster than any hurricane on Earth. Go deeper and you'd encounter metallic hydrogen, a state of matter we barely understand. And just like Venus, you'd be crushed by pressure millions of times greater than Earth's surface. On the other side of the solar system, Neptune is arguably the strangest planet. If you touched down on its atmosphere, you'd find freezing temperatures, winds moving faster than sound, and rain not made of water, but diamonds. In our own cosmic backyard, we are strangers. Beyond our solar system, the galaxy is teeming with possibilities. As of 2025, astronomers have confirmed 5,876 exoplanets across 4,383 planetary systems, with nearly 1,000 of those hosting more than one planet. And yet not one has shown a true promise of being Earth-like. Statistically, there should be millions, but what we've actually found are all nightmares in their own right. Take HD 189733b, a gas giant where it literally rains glass propelled by winds that reach 7,000 kilometers per hour. Or Tres 2b, the darkest known planet in the galaxy. It reflects less than 1% of the starlight that touches it. Then there's Kepler 70b, a world so close to its host star, it's hotter than the surface of our sun. Each of these planets defy life, but that isn't the question that seeps into every search for hospitable worlds, because if planets are so common, where is everyone? That question first came from a lunchtime conversation in 1950, when physicist Enrico Fermi glanced at a cartoon of aliens stepping out of a flying saucer and casually asked a question that would haunt science for decades. The Fermi paradox is the mystery of silence in a universe that should be anything but quiet. Because with all those stars in our own galaxy and an age of over 13 billion years, some would say life had more than enough time. If just a fraction of 1% of habitable planets developed intelligence, the Milky Way alone should be teeming with activity. Maybe we're the first. Maybe we're the last. Maybe something has made contact impossible or undesirable. Since I've already discussed this in another video on the channel, I won't go into detail too much, but it's worth mentioning the dark forest hypothesis. Going back to the three-body problem, Zixin Liu writes, "The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost. To reveal your position by broadcasting signals, building monuments, or flying probes across the stars is like shouting from behind a tree to alert other hunters to your position." And real-world science gives this theory credibility. Most of our radio transmissions dissipate quickly into background noise. To truly be heard, we'd have to try a little harder by building planetary-scale beacons and sustain them for centuries. Because there's another possibility called the Great Filter, a barrier in the timeline of life that almost nothing gets through. It could be behind us, in the form of rare chemistry, unlikely leaps in evolution, or the fragile balancing act of early ecosystems. Or it could be ahead, in the form of self-destruction, runaway technology, or contact with something that finally finds us. But that can't be the whole story. While outer space has certainly fueled many horror movies and games, it has also sparked other creative responses. Outer Wilds often leads the conversation, for good reason. The game is a masterpiece, but there are some lesser-known pieces of media that make a strong argument for the beauty of the celestial sphere. EXO-1 is a strangely relaxing game about an interplanetary vessel that uses momentum to travel across vibrant planets. There is no combat or survival in the gameplay. Instead, you spend your time launching yourself across the terrain, drifting through the air by flattening the orb, and figuring out how to traverse the environment of the different planets. EXO-1 invites you to forget the dangers of the cosmos, just for a moment, and instead lets you glide across huge, desolate planets, asking nothing more than that you explore. But even when outer space gives you the freedom to explore its depths, there's always a moment where the silence gets too loud. One moment that creeped me out when I wasn't expecting it was in 2021's Heavenly Bodies, another game that turns the physics of outer space into a puzzle in a very different way. You control a nameless astronaut. Or, well, controlling is a bit of a stretch, because the main challenge lies in the surprisingly intricate and often frustrating act of manipulating your astronaut's arms to independently grip, push and pull objects in the weightless environment. It's a deliberate and often clumsy display of human movement not confined by gravity. You're thrust out into the isolating vacuum to complete various tasks around a space station. It's really all about checking the operation manual with a short description and what needs to be done to keep the station from malfunctioning. Early on, there was one particular task where I had to fix a solar panel on the outside of the space station. However, due to the frustrating controls, I propelled myself outward with a little too much force and I hit my head on a pole and couldn't grab it in time to stop myself from floating into the void. I knew it was going to be fine. I knew the game wouldn't let me just drift forever, but the idea of being truly lost in that silence was scarier than most horror games. There is a distinct flavor of outer space melancholy that reminds me of the story of Voyager 1. Launched in 1977, Voyager was both a spacecraft and a message in a bottle flung into a cosmic ocean with the mission to study the outer planets of our solar system and then keep going, past Jupiter's harsh winds, past Neptune's diamond rain, into the deep dark. But halfway through its planetary tour, astronomer Carl Sagan had an idea that would echo through history. What if, before Voyager slipped into interstellar space, it turned around and took one last picture of Earth on February 14th in 1990 from a distance of 3.7 billion miles? It did just that to capture this picture, a tiny dot suspended in a beam of sunlight, less than a pixel wide. This is the image that became known as the pale blue dot. Sagan later wrote, "Everyone you love, everyone you know, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives on that mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam." Most wouldn't consider this horror in the traditional sense, but I personally find this image to be scarier than any monster or celestial void. In many ways, the purest form of existential terror is perspective and realizing how much we don't matter in the grand scheme of the universe. In that single pixel is everything we've ever known, and from Voyager's perspective, all of it, every civilization, every home, is no bigger than dust caught in a sunbeam. The space probe is now past the edges of our solar system, about 24.76 billion miles from home. On an interstellar scale, that means it's barely left Earth's doorstep. Looking back from these kinds of distances, it's clear to see the Earth isn't the center of anything, and if it were to go silent, whether by accident or intention, the universe wouldn't notice. There is no second Earth waiting to pick up where we left off. History has shown that even a single rogue asteroid from the depths of space that could wipe us out isn't something exclusive to fiction. On June 30, 1908, a meteor exploded over a remote part of Siberia with the force of 15 megatons of TNT, flattening 2,000 square kilometers of forest. But the thing is, the blast site wasn't even found until years later. If this had happened over a major city, it would have obliterated it. People at the time thought it might be the end of the world, without even knowing what caused it. And even if we somehow avoid any major disasters or encounters with distant civilizations, in a few billion years from now, the sun will grow so bright it's going to turn the planet into a scorched wasteland. And beyond that immediate heat death, the sun will eventually extinguish, leaving behind a white dwarf and a solar system drifting in ruin. The truth is, we live on borrowed time, which leads to another difficult question. Do we actually want something out there to find us? Or will we just vanish quietly without anyone ever knowing we were here? Perhaps that question is the true terror of outer space. Not the imagined monsters, not the uninhabitable distant planets, not even the all-consuming emptiness. It's images of our pale blue dot and knowing that everything, every song, every dream, every name we've ever given a place can disappear without leaving but a ripple behind. Not that that has ever stopped us from reaching outward. We place scribbles next to fascinating interstellar data. We send tiny rovers across alien soil. We plant radio signals into the void like seeds on faraway celestial bodies, not knowing if anything will ever grow. We keep looking up, even when we know the sky doesn't look back. And with that, thank you for being part of this journey. If you're looking for more cosmic horror or world-building videos, you can help me out by liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell icon to stay up to date. And I'll see you in the next video.